Something is starting to take shape around the Philadelphia Eagles as the 2026 NFL Draft gets closer, and if you've been paying attention, you can feel that this front office is once again preparing to make calculated, aggressive moves that could define the direction of this roster for years to come. Sitting at pick number 23 in the first round, there's a real sense that this decision is going to tell us a lot about how the Eagles view their current window to compete and where they believe the biggest weaknesses still exist. The debate internally feels very real. Do you reinforce the offensive line, which has historically been the backbone of this team's success? Or do you attack a clear need on the defensive front, specifically at edge rusher? And the more you break it down, the more it becomes obvious why the edge position is gaining momentum. Right now, the depth simply isn't where it needs to be. Nolan Smith and Jay Hunt are promising, especially with Hunt's development after transitioning from a college safety, but beyond that, there are still too many question marks. That's exactly why a player like Kendrick Fox starts to make so much sense here. He fits the mold of what this organization has consistently valued: size, length, versatility, and motor. This is not just about what he is today, but what he can become. Even though his sack numbers dipped last season, the pressure numbers remain strong, and that tells a deeper story about his impact on the field. He disrupts plays, he affects quarterbacks, and he brings a physical presence against the run that this defense still needs. Over the last 3 years, his production shows steady involvement: 10 sacks, 92 pressures, and multiple pass breakups, which also highlights his ability to impact passing lanes. That kind of versatility matters in today's NFL. You're not just drafting a traditional defensive end, you're getting someone who can line up in multiple spots, adjust to different schemes, and stay on the field in various situations. And when you think about how this organization builds, it aligns perfectly. The Eagles don't just draft for immediate needs, they draft with a long-term vision. There's a belief here that Falk could develop into one of the top pass rushers from this class. And if that happens, this pick suddenly becomes a cornerstone move. But the strategy doesn't stop there. If you go defense in round 1, it almost forces your hand in round 2, and that's where the offensive line comes right back into focus. The reality is simple: when the Eagles' offensive line is healthy and performing, this team looks like a contender. When it struggles, everything falls apart. Last season showed signs of regression, injuries piled up, and the overall performance dipped. That cannot happen again if this team wants to compete at the highest level. That's where a player like Keelan Rutledge comes into play. A versatile offensive lineman with experience at both tackle and guard. He brings toughness, strength, and the kind of developmental upside that this coaching staff knows how to maximize. His athletic testing backs it up too, showing he has the movement skills to fit into multiple roles along the line. He may not be a plug-and-play starter right away, but he gives you depth, flexibility, and a potential long-term solution inside. And as you move into the third round, things get even more interesting because now you start thinking about the future of the offense beyond just the trenches. Even after adding pieces like Marquise Hollywood Brown, Elijah Moore, and trading for Dontavion Wicks, the Eagles still appear to be looking ahead at the wide receiver position. There's a quiet acknowledgement that at some point changes could be coming, and preparing for that now is how elite organizations stay ahead. That's why someone like Ted Hurst stands out. A dynamic playmaker with size, speed, and the ability to create after the catch, he represents both immediate depth and long-term upside. Coming from Georgia State might have limited his exposure, but the skill set is there. And if he had played at a bigger program, we might be talking about him much earlier in the draft. This is where the strategy becomes clear. Build the trenches early, then layer in skill position talent with upside, all while keeping an eye on the future of key positions like wide receiver and tight end. Because let's be honest, the situation around Dallas Goedert has been uncertain for a while now, and eventually the Eagles will need a long-term answer there as well. Everything about this approach feels calculated, balanced, and very much in line with how this front office operates. They're not chasing headlines, they're building a roster that can sustain success. But at the same time, every one of these decisions carries risk. Drafting for projection over immediate production, betting on development, and planning for future roster turnover is not always easy, especially when expectations are high. So now it comes down to this: if the Eagles go edge rusher in round 1 and follow it up by reinforcing the offensive line and adding skill talent early, are you confident that this is the right path to keep this team in contention, or do you think they should prioritize immediate impact players to win right now? And this is exactly where the conversation starts to shift from just building depth to shaping the identity of the roster moving forward, because once you get past those first 3 rounds. The Eagles aren't just filling needs anymore, they're anticipating transitions before they become problems. When you look at the tight end position, for example, it's impossible to ignore the uncertainty that has surrounded Dallas Goedert over the last couple of off seasons. The organization has taken a wait-and-see approach, adjusting contracts, delaying long-term commitments, and essentially keeping their options open. That tells you everything you need to know. They understand that sooner rather than later, they'll need a new answer at that position.
That's why the selection of Sam Roush starts to feel less like a luxury and more like a necessity. This is not a flashy pick driven by college production, because his numbers don't jump off the page. But when you evaluate tight ends, especially at the college level, production can be misleading. Usage varies wildly, and unless you're a generational talent, you're often not the focal point of the offense. What stands out with Roush is everything that translates to the NFL: size, physicality, blocking ability, and athletic upside. He's the type of player who can line up in line, do the dirty work, and still develop into a reliable receiving option. And let's be honest, that was a major issue for the Eagles last season. The tight end room lacked physical presence in the blocking game, and that had a ripple effect on both the run game and pass protection. Even with some concerns like drops, the overall trajectory is encouraging. His athletic profile is elite for his size, and when you combine that with his willingness to block, you're looking at a player who fits exactly what this offense has been missing. It's a long-term investment, but one that could pay off in a big way if developed correctly. Then comes a move that perfectly reflects the philosophy that has followed this team for years: the quarterback factory approach. Selecting Garrett Nussmeier isn't about replacing the starter. It's about maintaining a pipeline at the most important position in sports. With Tanner McKee entering the final year of his deal and Andy Dalton nearing the end of his career, the Eagles are clearly thinking ahead. Nussmeier is a fascinating case. A player who dealt with injuries, inconsistency, and a chaotic situation at LSU, but still showed flashes of real upside. Over 4,000 yards and 29 touchdowns in a previous season shows the potential is there. The arm talent, the ability to extend plays, and the experience in a pro-style system all point to someone who, in the right environment, could develop into a reliable option. And there's another layer to this that can't be ignored: the connection with his father, Doug Nussmeier, who has ties within NFL coaching circles, including experience connected to systems familiar to the Eagles. That kind of background matters when you're drafting a developmental quarterback. It increases the chances that he can absorb coaching and grow within a structured system. As the draft continues, you start to see the Eagles lean even more into versatility and athletic upside, especially on defense. Jalen Kilgore is a perfect example of that, a player who doesn't fit into a single box, and that's exactly why he's valuable. He can line up as a nickel corner, rotate into safety, and contribute in multiple packages. This is the modern NFL. Defenses need players who can disguise coverages, adapt to different matchups, and handle hybrid roles. Kilgore brings that flexibility. His athletic testing backs it up. His physicality shows up in run support, and even though there are areas to clean up in coverage, that's where development comes into play. The Eagles have shown they value these chess pieces in the secondary, and this pick fits that pattern perfectly. Then you go back to the trenches again, because it always comes back to the trenches in Philadelphia. Parker Brailsford adds another layer of depth on the interior offensive line. He's experienced, durable, and brings leadership as a team captain. Over 40 starts in 3 years tells you this is a player who understands the game and can be trusted in critical situations. He may not be the most physically dominant player, and his size could be seen as a limitation, but his athleticism and technique help compensate for that. Giving up just 1 sack last season is no small feat, and while the pressure numbers are something to monitor, this is exactly the kind of late-round value that can quietly become an important piece of your roster. And then comes one of the most intriguing swings in this entire draft class. A true upside gamble, but one that could pay off in a way few others can. Bernard, coming out of Nigeria through the International Pathway Program, is the definition of a developmental prospect with rare physical tools. At 6 feet 4 inches, over 300 pounds, with elite explosiveness and testing numbers that turned heads, he represents a different kind of investment. This isn't about immediate impact. He might not even see the field early on. This is about patience, coaching, and believing in raw potential. The Eagles have taken chances like this before, and when it works, it can completely change the trajectory of a position group. The idea of stashing him, developing him behind the scenes, and possibly uncovering a high-level contributor down the line is exactly the kind of forward-thinking move that separates good teams from great ones. When you step back and look at the full picture, this draft strategy tells a very clear story. The Eagles are not just trying to compete this year, They're trying to sustain success over multiple seasons. They're addressing current weaknesses, reinforcing key areas, and preparing for inevitable roster changes before they happen. But here's the real question that every fan should be thinking about right now. If this plan hits, if these developmental players reach their potential, this roster could be incredibly balanced and dangerous. But if they don't, did the Eagles pass up the chance to add more immediate, game-changing talent when they had the opportunity? And that's where this entire conversation becomes even more intense. Because when you really think about it, the margin for error in a draft like this is razor thin. You're betting heavily on projection, on coaching, on development, and on your ability as an organization to turn raw or incomplete players into long-term contributors. That has worked for the Eagles before, but it doesn't always guarantee results. Because let's take it one step further. If Kendrick Fox doesn't develop into that high-end pass rusher, suddenly the edge position remains a weakness. If the offensive line additions take longer than expected to be ready, you risk repeating the same issues that held this team back last season. And if the skill position players like Ted Hurst don't translate quickly enough, you could find yourself lacking explosiveness at key moments during the year. At the same time, though, if even half of these picks hit their ceiling, this roster becomes incredibly dangerous. You're talking about a defensive front with depth and versatility, an offensive line that regains its identity, and a pipeline of young offensive weapons ready to step in when needed. That's how sustained contenders are built, not just with stars, but with layers of talent ready to emerge at the right time. And don't overlook the psychological aspect of this approach either. This front office is clearly sending a message. They trust their system. They trust their coaching staff. They trust their ability to develop players better than most teams in the league. That confidence shapes every decision, and it's why they're comfortable making picks that might not be the most obvious or popular in the moment. So now everything shifts from theory to reality. Draft night is where these plans either start to come together or begin to fall apart. The board won't fall perfectly. Surprises will happen. Players will go earlier than expected. Others will slide. And that's where we truly find out how disciplined and adaptable this